Disneyland Paris is full of rides that can wow, thrill and entertain you. But if you suffer from motion sickness, this can sound more like a nightmare than a dream. As someone who unfortunately suffers from motion sickness myself, I can totally relate to this. So today I'm going to run down which rides at Disneyland Paris can cause motion sickness, my own experiences of rides and motion sickness at Disneyland Paris, and give you some helpful tips to try and combat motion sickness so you can have an amazing time whilst you're in Disney. My name is Sophie from Most Magical Guides, and I make videos all about how to plan trips to Disneyland Paris and Walt Disney World, and also do vlogs of my own trips, including my upcoming Walt Disney World trip next month. So tune in from October for that new series. But if you do love this type of content, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. So the main types of rides that cause motion sickness are typically simulators, roller coasters, or rides that spin. So I'm going to break down the rides into those categories and then tell you what my own experiences have been like on these rides. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is coasters. Disneyland Paris does have quite a few different coasters. They have some that are family friendly, they have some that are more thrilling, some that go upside down, some in the dark, and all the different combinations of these can impact the motion sickness you may feel. The one that probably people talk about the most is Crush's coaster, and this seems to be the ride in Disneyland Paris that is the worst for people with motion sickness. Now, I have previously been on this many years ago, and actually it was before I started suffering from motion sickness, and even then it made me feel motion sick. Crush's coaster is a family coaster, that's what they say, and it is a thrilling ride. It's in the dark and it also spins whilst you're on a roller coaster track, and the combination of the roller coaster, the spinning and the darkness seems to be why this is the most problematic ride for motion sickness at Disneyland Paris. I would say if you suffer from motion sickness from spinning or coasters, then definitely avoid this, because where it's combining both of those elements, that's where it seems to be really tricky for people. If you're fine on roller coasters or spinning rides and simulators are more of a problem, then Crush's coaster will probably be fine. This is one of the most popular rides at Disneyland Paris. People absolutely love it. It also ends up having the longest queues because it is so popular. So there are obviously lots and lots of people that can enjoy this ride. Sadly, I'm not one of them. One of the most iconic roller coasters at Disneyland Paris is Space Mountain. Now, it's now branded as Hyperspace Mountain as it has Star Wars theming, and I love Star Wars, and I haven't been on it since it's changed the theming because of motion sickness. Now, this is a ride that I have been on plenty of times before. Before I suffered from motion sickness, coasters, particularly launch coasters, were my absolute favourite. This ride has one of the best launches I've ever been on. It's like being on a rocket. It is incredible. And I would say it's the best version of Space Mountain anywhere in the world. This can be problematic for people, again, who don't like roller coasters. This one is in the dark and it does go upside down. So those are the two factors to be aware of for this coaster specifically. For me, I can ride roller coasters absolutely fine if they are outside, but once they're in the dark and I can't see where I'm going, that's where I start to have problems. And that is honestly the reason why I haven't been back on this ride. Now, to be fair, I haven't tried it to see if it would make me feel motion sick. I'm always like, oh, I don't want to risk it. I think it is a ride that I should try and go on again. I think because I'm worried about feeling motion sick, it's put me off going on it. And if you went on it, you might be fine. Or you might be stressing yourself out about feeling sick and then make yourself feel sick. So who knows? But as I've said, before I used to suffer from motion sickness, I've been on this plenty of times and really, really enjoyed it. Again, if you're fine with coasters and dark rides, this is definitely something you will want to enjoy. But if dark coasters or roller coasters that go upside down are problematic for you, it's something to be aware of that Space Mountain does combine both of those. We've now got a brand new theming for a classic Disney roller coaster. So we now have Avengers Flight Force, which is in the new Avengers campus. This used to be Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, which was my absolute favourite ride at Disneyland Paris. If you've been on it before, then you will know it has a big launch. It also does go upside down a few times, and it is in the dark. It is a very thrilling ride. I think it's probably one of the fastest rides at Disneyland Paris. So this is something to be aware of, again, if coasters are tricky for you. As I said, when it was Aerosmith Rock and Roller Coaster, this was my favourite ride at Disneyland Paris. And it's definitely something to experience if you are okay with coasters, because it is epic. Now, I haven't tried it with the new Marvel theming yet. I have seen some on-ride videos, so you've kind of got a sense of what's going on. If I'm being honest, the queue looks amazing, but the ride itself looks a little lackluster. They haven't seemingly put a lot of effects into the coaster itself. So it will be interesting to go and experience this as it is no longer Aerosmith, which was one of my favourite things because Aerosmith are one of my favourite bands. So it will be interesting to see what the new theming actually is like when I get the chance to. It is a ride that I am keen to experience, and like I said, it's one of those things that I'm worried that I might feel sick on it because I'm worried about feeling sick on it. Does anyone else do that? Is that a thing? But where I have been on it lots of times before, I do know what to experience, what the ride is like, so I think that will work in my favour because I do have previous knowledge of it. The next coaster is my absolute favourite at Disneyland Paris. It is Big Thunder Mountain. I think this is the best version of Big Thunder Mountain in the world. It is so much fun. This is a family-friendly coaster and it is outside. So if you are someone that can ride coasters when you can see the track like me, you should be absolutely fine. It is worth mentioning that at the very end of the ride, there is maybe a 20-second section where you are in the dark. But for me, this doesn't make me feel unwell, which is good because normally coasters in the dark do kind of make me feel a bit icky. But I think where you've experienced the whole ride, your body's got used to the motion and it is such a short period of time that it's absolutely fine for me. Big Thunder Mountain does not go upside down, it doesn't have anything like that, but it does have some quite deep drops and it can be quite fast in places. I would say out of all of the roller coasters at Disneyland Paris, this is the one to try out to see if you are okay on coasters. This is going to be the most tolerable, and if you are someone that roller coasters can make feel a bit ill, I would start with this one, and then if you're okay you can progress onto some of the others, and then you can get a baseline of what the coasters are like at Disneyland Paris. Another coaster that I absolutely love is Indiana Jones and the Temple of Peril. This is a super fun coaster. It's a very short ride. It doesn't last very long whatsoever, so again it can be a good ride to test out because you're not on it for very long, so if it does make you feel a bit ill, you'll be off of it in a minute anyway. This is an outdoor roller coaster, so again you can see the track, but it does go upside down. It's just got one loop. I have no problems whatsoever on this ride. It doesn't make me feel motion sick at all. The only thing that I would say is it does rattle you about a bit, so your head can get bobbed about. But again, this is a good coaster to test out your tolerance. I would say it is the next level up from Big Thunder Mountain, just because you do have that loop. But apart from that, it's a pretty good coaster to test out how you're feeling with the types of rides at Disneyland Paris. Something that isn't technically a roller coaster, but I've included because it's kind of similar, is RC Racer. And basically you get into a big toy car, and then it goes up and down and just backwards and forwards a few times, but it kind of launches you quite quickly. You have some air time. It is a super fun ride. You can find this in the Toy Story Playground part of Walt Disney Studios Park. The theming is amazing, and it also has a single rider queue, which is good to know. Now this ride does make me feel slightly sick for about 30 seconds, and I think it's just because I'm someone that can get motion sick in cars, and the motion that tends to make me feel ill in cars is when there's like a sudden acceleration or a sudden taking off the brake. And this ride does have that sort of feeling when you kind of accelerate very quickly and then you get dragged backwards. So this ride can make me feel slightly ill, but it is not enough to put me off going on the ride. And my last couple of trips, I have done it multiple times. And like I say, it's only for a split second that I'm feeling a bit unwell. And again, I think it's that motion. If you're okay with kind of going forward or accelerations and stuff like that, you'll be fine. But if you do get motion sick in cars, and it's because of that kind of on and off of the accelerator or brake, then that's something to be aware of. The next type of rides I'm going to talk about are simulators. So these are rides that do make me feel sick as well. So I have some experience of the simulators at Disneyland Paris. Probably the most famous one is Star Tours The Adventure Continues. This is an amazing classic Star Wars ride that's recently had an update, so you've got new storylines, and it's a traditional simulator where you sit in seats and then it kind of moves about while you're watching a screen. It is a super fun ride, particularly if you love Star Wars, but I would say as a simulator, it is something that does make me feel motion sick. This is also a ride that a lot of people talk about getting motion sick on, so I would say if simulators are a problem for you, to probably skip over this. Something that is not technically a simulator in the traditional sense like Star Tours is Ratatouille The Adventure. Now, this is an incredible themed ride, especially if you love the film, and what you actually do is you sit in little rats and you're on a trackless system, which is really fun. So each time you go on it, you'll go a slightly different route. And then what happens is in certain sections of the ride, you will watch a screen, which you have 3D glasses for. And this is kind of where the simulator feeling comes in. Now, what I would say is typically when you are watching the screens, your vehicle is stationary. So you aren't combating moving and watching a screen, which is typically what makes people feel motion sick with simulators. Because of this, I felt okay on this ride. There have been times where I felt slightly unwell when coming off of it, but literally the minimal amount. It's not something that's ever put me off going back on the ride, and I've actually been fine within like a couple of minutes of getting off the ride. I would say if simulators are very problematic for you, then this ride could trigger that. But if you can kind of tolerate mild simulators, then this should be fine, because as I say, most of the time you are stationary when you're actually watching the screens. And again, another thing that's not technically a simulator but has similar elements is PhilharMagic. Now this is a show which you watch, it's 3D, but it's like the proper 3D where things come at your face, which is amazing, and you go through a series of different Disney films. It is super, super cute. But because you do wear 3D glasses and the screen itself stays stationary, your seat stays stationary, but because the screen, what you're watching is movement, because you've got the 3D glasses on, it can feel quite realistic. So again, that's something to be aware of. So I've never had a problem with this myself for this attraction. I've never felt even slightly sick. But I have been on similar things in Disney World. I don't know if you've ever been to Epcot where they have the circle vision. And again, that's just a screen and you're watching things. But because of the motion of the camera work, it made me feel really unwell. So I am aware that that is something that can trigger motion sickness. So for me, this has never been an issue. But if you are super, super sensitive to simulators, it might be worth considering whether to skip over this or to have a few moments where you just close your eyes. Because as I say, your seats don't move. Nothing is actually moving. It's not like a proper simulator experience, so closing your eyes probably could be a very good compromise so you can still experience this. So now I'm going to talk about spinning rides. This is one of the most common things that can trigger motion sickness, and there aren't too many rides at Disneyland Paris that do feature spinning, which is great news if you suffer from motion sickness. As we've mentioned before, Crush's coaster does include spinning as part of its coaster, so that is something to be considerate of and be aware of whether you might want to skip over that or take precautions if you do want to ride it. One of the most famous classic Disney attractions is the Teacups, and of course at Disneyland Paris you have a great version of this. Now if you've seen any of my vlog series, you know how much I love this ride and I go on it all the time, which shows you that I don't really get motion sickness from it. I was quite surprised. I was very nervous about going back on it because I was like, oh god, spinning, how am I going to cope? And I was so impressed that it didn't make me feel unwell. What happens is the Teacups themselves are on like a big desk, and that does move around, so your teacups do move and turn even if you don't spin them. Now I would say that movement itself does not bother me. If you are super sensitive to spinning, that could still make you feel a bit unwell. I would say I never really spin it myself because that is when you do the proper spinning, and I feel like that would make me feel ill. But just the movement of the cups moving across the desk on the floor, I'm absolutely fine with because there's not lots of spinning. One of the great things about the Teacups is that it is open all around it, so you could actually watch this ride in advance to see if it is something you think you could tolerate or not, which is perfect because some of the rides, especially a lot of the coasters, you cannot see what they're like before you are on them. So I think this is a massive advantage you have with the Teacups. Another ride that spins at Disneyland Paris is the Cars attraction in Walt Disney Studios Park. I'm going to attempt to pronounce it, but it's absolutely going to be wrong. Cars Quattros Ruiz Rallies. That's definitely not how you pronounce that. But it's basically the Cars ride that is opposite Crush's coaster. This is a super cute ride where you sit in the little cars that are designed like the cars from the film Cars. I said cars far too many times then. And then what happens is your ride vehicle spins, and they are also again on like plates on the ground, and those themselves spins. So there is a lot of spinning involved in this. Now again, I've been on this and been absolutely fine, which is I'm very lucky for. I didn't actually realise the first time I went on it was going to spin. I thought it was going to be more like a ride that I've been on in Disneyland California, where the car's more like dance. So I had no idea this was like a crazy spinning ride, and I actually think that worked in my favour because I wasn't expecting it. It just made me laugh so much. I wasn't thinking about feeling ill, and I was absolutely fine. And in fact, I've been on it since and I've been fine again. I would say the second time I felt a little bit queasy, but I think that was because I knew it was going to spin. But I would advise, if spinning is problematic for you, this ride may be something you want to avoid. Unlike the Teacups, you can't control the spinning, so this ride absolutely does spin, so there's no way of getting away from it. There are also a few other rides I thought I should mention that even though they don't have the classic elements that can make people feel ill, like being a coaster, spinning, or a simulator, there are some rides that can make you feel a little bit queasy if you do suffer from motion sickness. One of my all-time favourite Disney rides is the Tower of Terror. I love everything about it. I love that it's creepy, the spooky settings, the amazing costumes, and how that the cast members can kind of interact with you and be all creepy and scary. I love it. This was also one of my absolute favourite rides to go on. I would go on it over and over and over again. But since I've started suffering from motion sickness, this is a ride that makes me feel unwell. I've been suffering from motion sickness for probably the past 5 years or so, and I went to Disney World and went on Tower of Terror there, which is a gentler, shorter version, and that did make me feel a bit unwell, so I was nervous to go on this, but because it's my favourite ride, I was like, I'm going for it. Sadly for me, this ride did make me feel ill, so I did for about an hour after the ride feel a bit queasy, which is such a shame. For me, the reason it makes me feel ill is not the drop, but it's actually when you get pulled back up, and I think it's that same thing of it accelerating in a car and that motion making me feel ill, and it's the same sort of feeling. So I would say if you get car sick, this could be problematic for you because it's the same sort of feeling. And if you don't like that feeling of dropping and your stomach kind of going in the air with you, then this could be problematic too. If the Tower of Terror is something that makes you feel unwell, there is a similar ride, but a much gentler kid-friendly ride called Parachute Drop. Now this is again in Toy Story Playground, and it is a super fun ride. I am absolutely fine on this ride. It's very strange to me that this ride doesn't make me feel ill whatsoever, but Tower of Terror does. Now, of course, this one is not as high, it doesn't drop as fast, it doesn't pull you up as fast, and I think that's how I tolerate it more. This is more like a controlled drop and a controlled ascent, rather than like a drop and a sharp pulling up. So for me, absolutely fine, and there's no motion sickness whatsoever, but I would say if Tower of Terror makes you feel really, really unwell, then you might want to be cautious of this just in case. And now it's time for the ironic ride that can make you feel ill. So something that probably should not make people feel unwell is Slinky Dog Zigzag, and basically you're in a big Slinky, he's kind of in a circle, and he goes up and down in a circle. This is a kid's ride, it does not go very fast at all, but ironically this is one of the rides that makes me feel really ill. I've only been on this ride once because of that, and again, it's that kind of feeling of being in a car. For me, what the problem seemed to have been was the fact that you keep going up and down and up and down and up and down. It does not travel fast, it's nothing like that, but it just seems like that motion did make me feel a bit unwell. It is amazing to me that a kid's ride seems to be the one that's the worst for me, but that is sometimes the case. Does anyone else find that? So that is a rundown of all the rides at Disneyland Paris that can cause motion sickness and my experiences on them. The only rides that actively I've come off feeling unwell are Crush's Coaster, Tower of Terror, and Slinky Dog Zigzag Dash. There have been a few like Ratatouille where I felt a bit funny, but I've been absolutely fine. But I would say if you do suffer from motion sickness, there are ways to get around it so you can enjoy your time at Disneyland Paris. So I'm going to give you some handy tips now. My first tip is to take motion sickness tablets with you. I never go to Disney without them. I just would not enjoy my trip as much. I've started using Sturgeon, which you can get in the UK, and it's just a common motion sickness medication. Taking this in the morning before you go to the parks is perfect, and then you can just go and experience and enjoy the rides. I would say it definitely does help towards motion sickness. If there's something that you're particularly susceptible to, then it may still make you feel unwell, but definitely not as sick as you would previously. There are of course lots of different brands out there, so it's worth seeing which ones work for you and then sticking with them. Something else that I think is a big help is watching ride videos ahead of your trip. This then gives you a really good idea of what the ride is like and can help you prepare, because you may already know the track layout. If there's any drops or surprises, you'll be prepared for them. The great thing is on YouTube there are lots and lots of on-ride videos across the Disney parks, so you will definitely be able to see in advance what the rides are like. Something that is good to keep on you is ginger sweets or a drink like ginger ale, as ginger is a natural remedy for nausea. This can be great if you've been on a ride and you feel a little bit queasy. It can kind of help tame that feeling. And the final tip, which I'm sure is obvious to people who suffer from motion sickness already, is do not eat a big meal or drink lots just before going on rides that can cause motion sickness. Of course, if you've got food or drinks sloshing about in your stomach, you're more likely to feel unwell. So just plan out your day so that when you're going to do these big rides or simulators or rides that spin, leave them so that they are nowhere near when you're dining, and then you're going to have the best chance of having a great experience on them. Something I would say that is fantastic about Disneyland Paris is there are so many rides to experience. So if you have motion sickness, never fear. It's not going to be a case that when you're there, you're not going to be able to ride anything, because there's so many different rides to choose from. And like I say, if you take motion sickness tablets and take precautions like that, some of the rides that you're a bit nervous about going on may be absolutely fine, so you can enjoy them. But if you do decide, I don't want to risk it, then never fear. There's always going to be more rides and shows and experiences and character meet and greets to go to. There is just so much to do at Disney. You're never going to feel like you're missing out if you do skip over some rides. At the end of the day, you're at Disney to have a lot of fun. So if there is a ride that you think may make you feel sick and you're worried about going on it, then just skip over it. There is so much more to enjoy that you do not need to feel like you're missing out. I hope this motion sickness guide to Disneyland Paris has been helpful for you. Do you suffer from motion sickness? Which rides do you tend to avoid? Are there any rides you're nervous about riding at Disneyland Paris because of this? Let me know in the comments down below. But thank you for watching this video, and until next time, I hope you have a most magical day. Bye bye.